not all. Look, if I didn't say anything, you would interpret it as the hip hop is fine with his behaviors. There's no one else being vocal. So you would look at it and just say, because that mind your business, or let me not say nothing about nothing, or those things, it would allow the entire culture to register as if they're for.
Snoop Dogg didn't just turn his back on Tupac Shakur. He may have helped erase him, and now the walls are closing in. What many thought was the final chapter in Diddy's downfall is starting to look like a decoy, because the real pressure has shifted to the man who walked away with Death Row Records. From inside a prison cell, Suge Knight is naming names, and according to sources tied to the Las Vegas detention center, Keefe D., the only person ever charged in Tupac's murder, is talking, with Snoop's name repeatedly surfacing alongside allegations of a seven-figure payoff tied to Diddy. Netflix's documentary conveniently left key footage unseen. 50 Cent's camp is reportedly holding unreleased tapes, and Snoop's sudden, total silence is louder than any press denial. The timeline doesn't line up, the trial delays raise questions, and whispers of a flash drive packed with names no one wants confirmed are growing louder. This isn't about justice for Tupac anymore. It's about exposure, about who falls next, and why one of hip-hop's most protected figures suddenly looks like its most vulnerable. The first leak wasn't the story, it was the warning. What's coming next won't be a scandal. It'll be a purge.
The man put a lot of out there himself. So whether it's true or it's a lie, he got to answer for that. And whatever his explanation is, we're going to see. But he said
the moment Sean Combs was sentenced to 50 months in federal prison, the industry exhaled, convinced the story was finished and the damage contained. But that's when everything quietly shifted. While headlines stayed locked on Diddy, the whispers moved elsewhere, toward the one figure who had spent decades gliding past controversy untouched. Snoop Dogg's name didn't just surface. It landed at the center of the conversation, and the timing was flawless. As Diddy's lawyers filed appeals, as his sons rolled out a carefully timed documentary, and as the media declared the chapter closed, the first real cracks appeared. They didn't come from a courtroom or a press release, but from a prison call, this one from Suge Knight, the architect of Death Row. A man locked away with nothing left to protect and nothing left to lose. And what he said didn't just reopen old wounds. It tied Snoop Dogg directly to the one shadow hip-hop has never escaped, the murder of Tupac Shakur.
We can all have a grown-up discussion, and I don't think we need to cancel a longtime musical artist related to it. It was controversial at the time when they considered pulling it, and I guess this movie can't be shown in some countries. But honestly, really innocuous content.
The details spilled out fast and raw when Suge Knight, speaking from his cell in a recorded interview that quietly circulated before going public, didn't just hint at Snoop Dogg's awareness but claimed he was involved, alleging real conversations, real decisions, and real consequences surrounding Tupac Shakur's death. According to Suge, Snoop wasn't merely present in that era, he was part of what followed. A participant in the silence, a survivor who understood when to speak and when to disappear. The image of the laid-back West Coast loyalist, the future owner of Death Row Records, was suddenly recast as something far colder. A strategist who knew how the game worked because he'd lived inside it. What made the claims feel heavier wasn't outrage or denial, but the industry's response or lack of one. There were no immediate legal threats, no aggressive statements, no loud rebuttals. Instead, Snoop's camp went quiet, broken only by a single, carefully worded Instagram story. "Damn, mental health is real." Posted the same day Young Noble, one of Tupac's closest collaborators, died by suicide. In an industry built on rapid damage control, that restraint didn't read like confidence. It read like calculation, especially as the timing aligned with other long-buried pieces beginning to resurface all at once.
I have never seen, until Kendrick now, I'd never seen anybody from where I'm from, the area I'm from, the place I'm from, do what Snoop did.
The first crack in the story came with 50 Cent's documentary Sean Combs. The Reckoning, which dropped in early December and exploded past 21 million views in its first week, outperforming even Netflix's biggest releases. But what mattered most was what viewers never saw. According to Gene Deal, Diddy's former head of security, there was footage so volatile it was deliberately left on the cutting room floor, material he claimed didn't just implicate Combs but others whose names remain conspicuously unspoken. People are panicking? Deal allegedly said off camera, declining to clarify who, as if the implication alone was enough. That silence became louder when the second piece fell into place. The trial of Keefe D., the only person ever charged in Tupac Shakur's murder, was suddenly pushed back to February 2026, buying nearly 10 extra months of leverage. 10 months to talk, 10 months to negotiate, and 10 months for anyone who might be named in sworn testimony to quietly brace for impact, because delays like that don't happen without reason. They happen when what's coming next is bigger than what's already been revealed.
Let's talk about it, man. So you feel like it was bigger than Orlando shooting Pac. You feel like it's more to the story. You don't think it was that simple.
And then there's the money, the number that keeps surfacing no matter who's telling the story. $1 million. Keefe D. has repeatedly cited it as the alleged price attached to Tupac Shakur's murder. Money he claims moved through shadowy channels that were never fully traced, and according to Suge Knight, didn't stop with Diddy alone. The implication hangs there, unspoken but unavoidable. If the money didn't begin and end with one man, who else was paid to stay silent? Because deals like that are never one-offs, they're investments, and investments demand loyalty. That's why Suge's recent comments about Snoop Dogg, about private conversations, understandings, and behind-the-scenes agreements that never make it into police files, hit differently. The question isn't whether the claims are explosive, it's whether they can be verified, and in an industry where Diddy's sons are filming a narrative-shaping documentary, 50 Cent is sitting on unreleased footage, and Keefe D. remains the only living figure who can connect the dots under oath, verification may be the one thing no one can afford. The contradictions only deepen when you look at timing. Snoop's 2022 purchase of Death Row Records was framed as a triumphant reclaiming of West Coast legacy, but it closed just as whispers about Diddy's private behavior began circulating, just as federal pressure intensified, just as the industry sensed a reckoning coming. And then there's the silence. While artists across hip-hop publicly honored Shakur on the anniversary of his death, Snoop posted nothing, no tribute, no remembrance, only a repost of an old interview about moving forward, a phrase that lands differently when the past refuses to stay buried.
Then as soon as I walked out of there, I went in the bathroom and I threw up. And just laid on the floor for like 30 minutes. His mama came in there and cleaned me up.
And then there's the reaction, or more accurately, the absence of one, to Suge Knight's accusations. In almost any other scenario, claims this severe would spark instant pushback. Defamation threats, legal denials, a statement crafted by attorneys within hours. Instead, Snoop Dogg's camp has gone silent, and not the casual kind. The only voices filling the gap are bloggers dissecting the quiet, fans arguing loyalty, and insiders who understand that when powerful figures stop talking altogether, it's rarely because they feel safe. It's because they're waiting to see how violent the fallout becomes before choosing their position. What makes the silence more telling is what's happening behind it. Reports suggest legal teams being retained not to sue, but to manage exposure, old associates being contacted not for nostalgia but to make sure their stories align. And then there's the persistent whisper about flash drives linked to Kim Porter, rumors of private recordings and images allegedly involving some of the industry's biggest names. The existence of those drives has never been confirmed, but what stands out is that no one, not Diddy's representatives, not Snoop's team, not even the most aggressive tabloids, has outright denied they exist. In an industry where denial is a reflex, that restraint is deafening. And this is where the narrative begins to bend, because if this were only about Diddy, attention would still be fixed on his appeal, his prison reality, his son's documentary. Instead, the spotlight has shifted to the man who spent 3 decades floating above controversy, who bought the label Tupac died tied to, who had never been directly linked to the violence, the scandals, or the backroom deals until now. Shifts like that don't happen organically. Someone is steering the story, feeding the leaks, reframing the questions so they're no longer about what happened, but about who's next. Because the first rule of damage control isn't waiting for the storm to pass. It's redirecting it. And right now, the storm appears to be moving in Snoop's direction.
Well, she just a strong black woman off the tippy. You know what I'm saying? Like,
But here's the part that refuses to line up. If this were only about Tupac Shakur, about old rivalries, unresolved grudges, and decades-old street politics, the targets would be clearer, the accusations louder, the responses explosive. That's not what's happening. Instead, the narrative is being carefully managed. Leaks released in controlled bursts, reactions measured, and the one person capable of shutting it all down, Snoop Dogg, hasn't just gone silent, he's gone absent. No interviews, no live stream clarifications, no moment of public reckoning, just a single Instagram story about mental health posted the same day one of Shocker's closest collaborators, a member of the Outlaws Tupac personally assembled and signed to death row, took his own life, a group whose catalog now falls under Snoop's ownership. And then there's the documentary being filmed by Diddy's sons, framed as a family's attempt to reclaim a name, yet delayed just long enough to let 50 Cent's expose land first, letting the industry absorb the initial damage before making their move, suggesting this isn't pure defense but leverage, a negotiation timed for when the other side believes the war is already over. But the most revealing detail isn't the accusations or the prison calls. It's the assets quietly changing hands. Death row wasn't just a symbolic purchase, it was an acquisition. And in an industry where catalogs equal power and legacy equals currency, the person who controls Shocker's final recordings also controls how much of his story survives intact. Which means if there's anything left unsaid, anything still capable of damaging reputations, the decision to release or bury it doesn't belong to the courts, it belongs to Snoop. That's when it becomes clear this isn't about the past, it's about containment, because power isn't about control, it's about limiting exposure. The real question is no longer what happened to Shakur or what Suge Knight is claiming from his cell, but what comes next, because the leaks won't stop, the trials won't disappear, and the man at the center of it all isn't just staying quiet, he's bracing for impact.
like I keep saying, like, when you get to be the age that we at and you get to become as successful as we are, you have to start doing some things that matter for the future.
The pattern becomes impossible to ignore once you look at who vanished from the narrative and who was given the space to reshape it. Tupac Shakur's death wasn't treated as an ending. It was a reset, a moment where blame could be neatly assigned, loose ends quietly sealed, and the survivors could rebrand themselves as untouchable power players instead of witnesses. And no one understood that better than the men closest to the blast radius. Diddy, shielded by the rapid rise of Bad Boy and an image built to outrun controversy. Suge Knight, the imprisoned architect of death row, still exerting influence from behind bars, and Snoop Dogg, the one who appeared to walk away untouched. But resets only work when no one looks too closely, and now someone is digging. Because this story isn't just about what happened in 1996, it's about what's been happening ever since. The same figures who shaped the narrative then are still trying to manage it now, and the cracks are finally visible. Go back to Quad Studios in November 1994. Shakur is ambushed, shot 5 times, survives, and emerges convinced the danger came from inside his own circle. He names names. Trust collapses. Less than 2 years later, he's gone. Yet the men he accused didn't just endure the fallout, they flourished. Diddy's empire exploded. Suge kept death row afloat until his own legal collapse. And Snoop did what he's always done best: adapt. He created distance from the chaos without fully leaving the power structure, collaborated across enemy lines, recorded with Biggie, shared platforms with Diddy, and positioned himself carefully enough that when the smoke cleared, he stood alone with his reputation intact. That isn't coincidence. That's strategy. And strategy of that precision doesn't come from innocence. It comes from knowing exactly where the bodies are buried.
So him being neutral in the beginning was amazing. And then him choosing sides at the end was a demise.
And then there's how the industry chose to remember Tupac Shakur. For decades, his death was packaged as the inevitable fallout of the East Coast-West Coast War, a tragic but unavoidable casualty of rap's most volatile era. But that explanation only works if you ignore the contradictions, like how the supposed enemies, Diddy and Snoop Dogg, later shared stages, tracks, and business interests while Shocker's case remained frozen in time. Or how the only man ever charged now insists the money behind the hit didn't stop with Diddy. That's not chaos, that's a system, and systems don't form by accident. They're built by people who understand silence, loyalty, and profit. Which brings us to the flash drives, the ones no one will confirm or deny. rumored to contain private recordings and images left behind by Kim Porter that could rewrite everything. Their existence has never been proven, but the reaction to them has. Lawyers quietly retained, statements pre-written, and a curious shift in focus away from Diddy towards Snoop. Because powerful men fear exposure, but they fear unspinnable exposure even more, the kind that doesn't bruise reputations but annihilates legacies. And legacy is the only currency that can't be bought back. What makes this even more telling is where the real movement is happening now. Diddy's sons didn't rush to defend their father when the verdict came down. They waited. They watched 50 Cent's documentary land. They let the first wave of damage settle. Only then did they begin filming a project centered not on courtrooms, but on influence, history, and narrative control. That delay says everything. This isn't a tribute, it's a counterstrike, and counterstrikes don't happen without leverage. The real question isn't what they're filming. It's what they already know, what Diddy told them, and how far they're willing to go when the truth becomes a bargaining chip.
You know, and with this arrest of Keefe D, brought more questions. You know what I mean? And and there was some answers with that. So it has to be looked at.
And then there's Death Row Records itself. When Snoop Dogg bought the label in 2022, it was sold as a symbolic homecoming, a reclaiming of West Coast legacy. But Death Row isn't just nostalgia, it's leverage. It's an archive. It's the rights to Tupac Shakur's final recordings, the contracts, the unreleased material, the private studio sessions that have never seen daylight. And if there's anything left that could still implicate the people who were present when Shakur was killed, Snoop is the one who controls access to it. That's not sentiment, that's insurance. And insurance like that is priceless, which makes his silence impossible to ignore. Not just about Suge Knight's accusations, but about everything. No interviews, no denials, no effort to get ahead of the story, just a single, carefully worded Instagram post about mental health. Shared the same day one of Shakur's closest collaborators took his own life, a member of the Outlaws, the group Tupac formed in his final months, a group signed to Death Row, a group whose catalog Snoop now owns. That isn't coincidence, it's communication. And not for the public, but for the people who already know the truth. Because in this industry, silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. And now the documentary war is underway. 50 Cent has fired first. Diddy's sons are filming their counter-narrative, and looming over it all is the one player who hasn't shown his hand yet. Snoop. After 30 years in the game, he understands the rule better than anyone. Don't deny the story, rewrite it. And right now, he's the only one with the access, the motive, and the resources to do exactly that. The trials are coming. The rumors about flash drives won't die. And the industry's biggest names are starting to feel the pressure. The real question isn't what's already happened. It's what happens when the dam finally breaks. Because when it does, it won't stop with one name. It'll hit everyone who benefited from the silence. And in hip-hop, that list is longer than anyone wants to admit.